The primary goal of this video is to close out the series on our MCI bus conversion project. In order to do that, we're going to talk about why we purchased a bus to convert in the first place, what lessons we learned from the bus conversion process, what happened to the bus, and finally, what our next steps are. So why a bus? The high cost of housing, whether renting or buying, really drove the idea for a search for alternative living situations. Now, in defining an alternative, obtainable living solution, we experienced a disconnect between what we thought we needed to live comfortably and what we actually needed to live comfortably. This led us to go big, at least as far as tiny houses are concerned. A bus conversion solved all of our perceived issues at that time, biggest of which was an affordable place to call our own. Other items on the list included plenty of space for 2 people, enough storage to fit all of Lauren's shoes, the flexibility to travel as we didn't know what our final destination would be at the time, potential resale value when the project was completed and we had finished living in it. Overall, an affordable cost when compared to the cost of owning or renting a house. And finally, a blank slate or a customizable platform for us to build the bus to our own liking. So as we developed a vision for how converting a bus would fit into our lives, we got caught up in that, meaning we could have easily accomplished everything on our list, our requirements, our escape from the high cost of living, by purchasing an RV. It would have limited some of the creativity a little bit, but would have been a completely doable way to accomplish what our goals were. But we know best. The decision was made that a bus conversion was the best option for us. So we had to make one final choice: a school bus or a charter bus. Now, it's obvious that we ended up going with a charter bus, and the reason was we felt it provided more flexibility in the design process and the overall comfort of the bus over a school bus, and it was a very small amount more that we had to pay. So, on September 19th, 2015, we drove down to Long Beach and we bought a charter bus. The cost was $5,750. It was well used, well loved, and ready to come home with us. So without ever having driven a 40-foot bus before, I made the trip through traffic from Long Beach back to Monrovia.
Day 1.
The first thing that we learned was to understand our storage needs in order to accomplish the bus conversion. The bus was first stored around my house in Monrovia. Of course, that was until the police said to move it a couple days later. Ultimately, we did find a place to work on it in Arcadia, California, not too far from the house. It was a random dirt lot in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Power could only be provided through use of a small generator. Unfortunately, our generators were too loud for the surrounding neighbors, and we were told we could no longer use our power tools. So, we had to search for a new storage location. The only affordable location we could find that had power available was in Laverne, California. This was about 30 minutes from my house. So though we had access to power, this was still not optimal. It was a further drive to the bus, and the space around the bus was extremely limited. It made for some precarious situations at different times during the build. Fully understanding the amount of space needed to undertake a bus conversion will save a huge amount of grief. We decided Los Angeles is simply not the place for us to do such a large project. We could have saved a lot of time and a lot of money understanding the single obvious point going into the project. The second lesson we learned was being realistic about the cost of your conversion. Once again, this might sound like an obvious one, But when you're truly optimistic and in the rationalization phase of planning your conversion, you tend to glaze over some of the facts that are right in front of you. Building off of the first lesson, which was understanding the space requirement you need in order to convert a bus, is the cost of that space. And for us, being in LA where there is a limited, extremely limited amount of space, the cost for storing the bus was fairly significant over the entire term of the conversion period, because it does take longer to convert a bus than you expect it to. That was a major cost in the budget that we hadn't fully planned on. The second major cost is really the small things that you don't think about when you're thinking about the build overall. Our mind always goes to large appliances like the bed or the refrigerator, a microwave, solar panels. Those are easy things for us to picture and price out. But the small items that add up extremely fast are things such as adhesives, rivets, screws, fiberglass. These are things that by the end of the project will cost you thousands, and you might not fully understand when you're first undertaking it. A third cost of the conversion, which might be more of a philosophical cost, is time. The amount of time that you're going to spend on the conversion is taking away from the time that you might be out adventuring in the conversion or doing things with friends, family. So going with a smaller conversion actually starts to make more sense when you realize that you'll be out in the world a lot faster. Another major learning point from the cost section, it is sometimes cheaper to buy someone else's project. With our situation, we bought the cheapest charter bus available, and it ended up costing us more in the long run to get it to a certain point than it would have if we had bought one of the many buses we had found that already had roof raises done and just needed some of the finishing touches. Ultimately, we would have saved time and money, which seems to be a common theme with all the lessons we learned. The third lesson we learned was to understand the commitment and schedule required to get the job done. A bus conversion is no small task. Throughout the process of our conversion, both Lauren and I worked full-time. Lauren lived in San Diego and drove up to LA on the weekends, which was a 2-hour drive. That meant Friday night for her was a drive to LA, and Sunday night was a drive back to San Diego. She did this for close to 6 months. Eventually, Lauren's job ended in San Diego, and she moved to LA with me. We got to share the house with 3 awesome roommates, which was a very fun time. But about 6 months later, the lease was up and the house was being sold. So our living arrangement was up in the air again. Because of this, we decided to not make our life more complicated, and Lauren moved back to Camarillo with her mom and found a couple jobs in Ventura County. I lived in the back of my Prius during the week in Pasadena, and drove back to Ventura County to stay at my grandma's Friday evenings. And Saturday would come and we would drive back to Laverne in order to work on the bus. The drive from Thousand Oaks to Laverne is a 1.5 to 2 hour drive depending on traffic. And around LA, there's always traffic. We went from 2 days of working on the bus per week to 1, so progress naturally slowed to a crawl, and morale was rather low. We also were given news the land was being sold where we were storing the bus. That meant we would have to vacate the premises within the coming month or two. The difficult situation of finding a place to store the bus was once again upon us. Though it might seem obvious that this situation was doomed to fail from the beginning, in the moment it truly wasn't. We had short-term goals, near-term timelines for moving out of Southern California, and an overall optimistic view on the tasks that needed to be completed. We were dedicated to our full-time jobs and simply didn't have the time nor the space to complete the conversion. This did not sink in We were optimistic with a full head of steam, and we hit a wall about 2 years in. So it took time to understand these obvious lessons, but we did learn them at a cost. The fourth lesson we learned about our bus conversion was to be realistic about the outcome. Our bus was old, it had rust, it was rough around the edges. We wanted to clean, polish, and fix it up to the best of our abilities. In reality, we could have built the bus out on top of everything that was existing and used it that way for a few years without experiencing any issues. Taking the hard road and going very in-depth to the build gave us a sense of satisfaction and pride, but cost us money, time, sweat. None of this could be recouped. Being realistic about the use of the bus, the basic requirements to achieve that use, and building to that spec would be very beneficial in the overall scheme of the bus conversion. The fifth lesson we learned while doing the bus conversion is that smaller is easier. Talk about an obvious lesson, but it's one that we needed to learn. When you're faced with moving into a home on wheels, it means you're giving up some of the comforts of home. So when doing that, you might be reluctant to give up too many comforts all at once, and that's the position we were in. So going big with the bus, to us, meant that we were keeping more comforts, although that came at a cost. Going big meant that we were less nimble, the gas mileage was worse, it would be harder to tow if we broke down. Maintenance and upkeep overall, on the long term, were much greater. And then the simple fact that the conversion is a much harder process because of the sheer size and amount of resources necessary. So while obvious, it takes a while for that to sink in, because you might think it means that moving to a smaller vehicle means you're giving up a significant amount of comfort. But that doesn't have to be the case, as we found out. In some ways, it actually makes your life so much easier, especially down the road after the conversion when you're using it, that it makes up for any comforts that you do have to give up. In that way, a van was much more worth it for us, and a huge lesson that we learned. Those were the 5 major lessons that we learned in the 2 years or so that we undertook our bus conversion project. Those lessons might seem pretty obvious, and they're all fairly related: time and money, which is everything that you hope to escape going into a bus conversion. But being overly optimistic and kind of romanticizing the process, you might glaze over those somewhat obvious lessons. But let's talk about where the bus is now and what ultimately happened to it. As many of you know, we ended up listing the bus for sale on YouTube, and yes, ultimately it did sell. But what got us to the point of actually listing it? Well, it was a combination of things. One aspect was the fact that we had already put in a significant amount of time and money into the project, and we felt that it needed more. We still didn't have that time to give to the bus, but we were ready to move on. Another factor was the land being sold where the bus was stored. This meant that we had to once again go out and search for a storage facility. It was getting harder and harder for us to, 1, have the motivation, and 2, actually find locations where we can store and work on the bus. It seemed like they were also getting increasingly expensive, as we had already gone through 2 of our options. So that really pushed us over the edge when it came to finally parting ways with the bus. Now, upon leaving, we did take the bus to a local mechanic, which was a tricky scenario because it did have a Detroit diesel 6V92 2-stroke engine, which there aren't a lot of mechanics that will work on those anymore. But after having the bus inspected, they did say that there was the potential for some issues with the engine. We felt that not having the space to work on it, it was going to be a costly procedure. If we had the space, it would have been an immensely fun project to be able to take it apart and fix what needed to be fixed. But the mechanic also couldn't tell us whether that would really affect the drivability of the bus. And as such, it had always started for us, and we had driven it around town without any issue. We ultimately had to lower our asking price for the bus quite significantly, and that resulted in us losing a fairly large amount of money on this project. That hurt. But the bus did sell. The new owners drove it about an hour and a half and had no issues with it whatsoever, and they have enjoyed the bus. We've been able to go back and visit them, and that's been a really cool experience. So one of the best aspects of this bus project has been meeting all the people we have met because of it, all the conversations we've been able to have because of it. The fact that we were able to start a YouTube channel and talk with people all over the world, those were all added benefits. So though it did cost us time and money, and ultimately ended up with us not finishing the project completely, we're proud to have done what we did and gotten it to the point we got it to. It was a fun project. With that, let's talk about present day, because although this is new information for a lot of you, we actually sold the bus around a year ago. And before we sold the bus, we had actually started on our next project. Maybe we have an issue, but we did ultimately convert a van, and it has been a primary residence for quite some time. It's been functional and really a joy to both work on and use. So we will be bringing you the van, the 2004 Dodge Sprinter 3500. We have all the video footage from that build process. We have footage from some of our travels and the things we've been doing. So we're both very excited to bring that to you. It'll be on a new channel, Bears Builds, and we look forward to seeing you there. I hope you enjoyed this video and learning about what eventually happened to the bus and some of the lessons we learned. And I hope you join us for our new channel, because we will be releasing videos there shortly. Till next time.